Edward Snowden did help the New York Times keep the public informed on what I consider to be very important matters.
Jill Abramson has the final say on what is the news that's fit to print. As the executive editor of the New York Times, she sets the agenda, which at times takes on the powerful.
I would say it is the most secretive White House that I have ever been involved in covering.
During the run-up to the Iraq War, Abramson was the D.C. bureau chief for the paper, which she says ran some seriously flawed stories.
We were, I think, not diligent enough.
I talked to her about the future of the paper and about accusations that the paper is too far left.
Welcome to Talk to Al Jazeera, Jill.
Well, thanks so much, John.
It's good to have you on the program. Tell us what it's been like to be the editor of the New York Times the last couple of years. I mean, did you dream about this?
It's something I have dreamed about since I've been a professional journalist. I never expected that I would actually have this job, but some part of me always, certainly dreamed of working for the New York Times. I grew up here in Manhattan. My family actually had 2 home delivery subscriptions to the Times because my mother was a passionate puzzler, but she couldn't stand to have the puzzle ripped out. So she didn't want anyone to touch the section that the puzzle was in. So my father had to have his own New York Times.
Let me dive right into the news then and talk a little bit about the NSA and Edward Snowden.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Ellsberg was quoted recently as saying that Edward Snowden was his hero. Do you see Snowden as a hero or a traitor?
I see him as a very good source. We have published many of the NSA and GCHQ documents that came from Snowden, and so I view him, as I did Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, as a very good source of extremely newsworthy information.
Some things were published, some things were not published. How do you make those decisions?
We make those decisions trying to apply common sense balancing tests where we respectfully listen to concerns of the U.S. government that publishing a story is going to actually harm national security, and we balance those concerns against the importance and newsworthiness of the information and our primary duty, which is to keep the public informed.
This was a big story. Were you personally involved? Do you get involved in stories like this?
I do.
Tell me how that works.
I was personally involved in the Snowden material, and with Dean Baquet, the Times' fantastic managing editor, we went to London because The Guardian and
Glenn Greenwald
Bridger were our partners in the reporting off of the NSA material. We personally went and painstakingly made preparations about how we would handle the material and keep it secure. And unusual for the executive editor to be involved. Not when something is
big,
where the reputation of the Times could be at stake. No, I mean, there aren't that many stories of that nature, but when there are, it's usual for the top editors to be directly involved.
Is it comparable to the Pentagon Papers?
It's hard to say. I mean, the Pentagon Papers, and in that situation, obviously Daniel Ellsberg was a source, for that material coming out of the Pentagon. That material exposed really terrible, terrible official lies by the U.S. government. Lies about the progress of the Vietnam War. And that made, that material so consequential, I think, because of that. In this case, the material has, provided a window onto, the scale of eavesdropping and all kinds of troubling things, and some, certainly misstatements by officials, but I'm not sure they've exposed, a wholesale cover-up and public lying over years and years the way the Pentagon Papers did.
On the editorial page, the Times editorialized saying that Edward Snowden should be considered for amnesty. You get involved in the editorials?
I don't.
You
I
don't.
have no involvement.
So you don't write editorials ever?
I don't even know what the editorials are going to be the next day. There's a pretty strict, we call it the Chinese wall here, between the opinion side of the Times and the news side, and I'm on the news side.
So do you agree, disagree with the editorial's opinion when it comes to Edward Snowden and amnesty, or do you have an opinion?
I don't have an opinion. I value the fact that by doing what he did, Edward Snowden did help the New York Times keep the public informed on what I consider to be very important matters.
Let me move on to another topic and the Obama administration. How do you think how would you grade this administration compared to others when it comes to its relationship with the media?
Well, I would slightly like to interpret the question as how secretive is this White House, which I think is the most important question. I would say it is the most secretive White House that I have ever been involved in covering, and that includes, I spent 22 years of my career in Washington and covered presidents from President Reagan on up through now, and I was Washington bureau chief of the Times during George W. Bush's first term, and that was, they kept a fairly tight lid on things. I dealt directly with the Bush White House when they had concerns that stories we were about to run put the national security under threat. But, they were not pursuing criminal leak investigations. The Obama administration has had 7 criminal leak investigations. That is more than twice the number of any previous administration in our history. It's on a scale never seen before. This is the most secretive White House that, at least as a journalist, I have ever dealt with.
And do you think this comes directly from the president?
I would think that it would have to. I don't know that, but certainly enough attention has been focused on this issue that if he departed from the policies of his government, I think we'd know that at this point.
So it makes it more difficult for the New York Times to do its job, in your opinion?
It does.
The White
and in
House
the case of the White House does, and in the case of specific journalists, I would talk for a minute about Jim Risen, who was one of my most valued colleagues. In 2005, he is the reporter who, along with Eric Lischblau, broke the story about the NSA's warrantless eavesdropping, which was, in a way, the first view we had into the world of the NSA's collection of data and communications. He's a fantastic reporter, and he has had this leak investigation hanging over his head for years now. And, it makes his, source, it's not like national security sources come easy to any reporters in Washington.
So let's go back in administration, if we can. You were in Washington during at least the first term of George W. Bush. Was the media or the New York Times misled by the Bush administration when it came to the Iraq War?
Yes, we were.
Were we fooled?
There's no doubt about that. We were, I think, not diligent enough. I don't know if we were purposefully fooled. I think that there was a terrible echo chamber where unreliable Iraqi defectors were speaking both to members of the media and to intelligence officials and high officials in the Bush administration, and that an echo effect took hold, where like all the information was coming from one set of bad sources, but it seemed that multiple sources were confirming the information, and it created like a kind of perfect storm. I'm not excusing it at all, and not excusing the Times' role in running some very seriously flawed stories based on. She was not alone. It was not only Judy Miller. There were, I think, 10 or 12 stories that we ended up in an editor's note saying we had, concerns about. And so I'm not, minimizing that at all. But I don't think we know for certain that there was a purposeful, let's, fool everyone scheme hatched inside the Bush White House. But there's a serious lack of diligence and an unwillingness, I think, because the prevailing view in Washington was that there was intelligence supporting the idea that Saddam Hussein had a active WMD program. There were dissenters inside the government. There were analysts at the CIA who thought this is flimsy evidence to support that. But it's kind of, journalists were not listening as closely to them or trying hard enough to find those sources, and instead, in a boom effect, we're carrying these baseless stories from other sources. It's a bad moment both for the government and for journalism.
Coming up on Talk to Al Jazeera, I'll ask Jill Abramson what she says to the critics who say the New York Times is just too liberal.
Only on Al Jazeera America.
I lived that character.
Go one-on-one with America's movers and shakers.
We will be able to see change.
Gripping, inspiring, entertaining. No topic off limits.
I'm like, Dad, there are hookers in this house.
Exclusive conversations you won't find anywhere else.
These are very vivid human stories. If you have an agenda with people, you sometimes don't see the truth.
To watch new episodes of Talk to Al Jazeera, check your local listings or visit aljazeera.com.
I'm John Siegenthaler. Welcome back to Talk to Al Jazeera. I'm talking to Jill Abramson, the executive editor of the New York Times. So let's talk a little bit about the newspaper itself right now.
Mm-hmm.
I wake up in the morning and I reach over to the night table and I pick up my iPhone and I call up the New York Times app rather than walk outside and pick up the newspaper itself, which is sitting there, which often doesn't get read. I mean, is that something that happens to you?
I actually am a multi-platform reader. It depends on where and when I am, but I still get immense pleasure out of reading the print newspaper.
I do too,
and spend at least an hour every morning, actually, even though I've read, we've published a lot of the articles that are in the print paper on our website, and they've been published on our apps too. But I still love, just in some ways the serendipity of seeing a story inside one of the sections that I didn't know about before, and you find yourself reading it, you don't know quite why, but it's sort of a joyous experience.
We share that love of print.
I know, but we're both of a certain age.
We are of a certain age, and my father was in the newspaper business, and I love the print, but honestly, going forward, do you see print in the future of the Times?
I think that in terms of the future, the next, let's say, 20 years, I think that we're going to be publishing digitally, and I think there still is going to be an audience for the print paper. I really do. We have over 800,000 home delivery subscribers who have taken the paper for 2 years or more. It's a very loyal base of readers, and you know, the newspaper is profitable still, and that doesn't mean that I don't recognize the reality that our much bigger audience is a digital audience, and that is the audience where our future growth will come from, for sure. But I do think, at least definitely for the rest of my career, I'm going to be paying lots of attentions to both digital platforms and the print newspaper.
The Times hasn't escaped the financial difficulties that the media has faced over the last 5 years. And, I mean, we've seen in other places, in other organizations, bureaus being closed, layoffs.
Right.
We've seen simply not as much money spent on investigative news. So I mean.
So why has the Times been different? Because all of those trends that you've just cited have not happened here, and there are a couple of reasons. One is the amazing commitment of our publisher, Arthur Sulzberger Jr. and his family, which own the New York Times, to continue to provide the world with the best quality journalism. That is our business.
But you got to make money at it
in
order to keep going. But the ad model is broken, right? The model in which advertisers came in and put, you know, their mark in the New York Times and paid a certain price. If you move to digital, they're not paying those prices,
are they? They're not paying as much,
so
right?
How does it...
I think a model will emerge. Maybe not with the same exact returns as print advertising gets, but we are very smart. The New York Times has now developed 2 revenue streams. There's ads, but because we decide to have a flexible subscription model, we are asking our heaviest readers, the people who are just, you know, every day they've got to read, you know, many stories in the New York Times. We ask them to pay. I'm not like embarrassed that we ask people to pay.
And how's that working?
So that's working great.
More money than you expected.
More money than was originally forecast.
Can you talk about the relationship between the Times and social media nowadays?
Sure.
I mean, yeah, I can remember a time when Twitter and Facebook didn't have much impact on the New York Times. Does it now?
Well, Twitter and Facebook have impact in, like, bringing audiences to us. If one of our stories is being mentioned prominently on either one, our traffic grows. What Facebook and Twitter have done is, you know, they engage readers. It's a way for readers to decide and almost publish themselves what they think is most interesting in the Times or anywhere in the journalistic firmament. And some people prefer, like, stories that their friends are recommending than the ones I pick for the front page of the Times, and that's show business.
How do you pick what's on the front page? There's a picture here of Governor Christie.
Right.
Did you pick that?
I did pick that. Well, our photo editor actually picked that particular one, but I decided, in part because we didn't have the news story about Christie's State of the State speech, I thought it would be good to have a picture of him at the top of the page.
And you talk about and decide eventually, I guess you're the final word on whether or not a picture like this goes in, or whether or not the NSA story runs here.
Right.
As opposed to below the fold?
Yes, that's true.
Are those tough? These are tough decisions for you, yes?
They are important decisions, and, you know, over time, you just kind of, it's a gut call in a way, but it's not a random decision, and often, you know, the stories that are out there reflect actual news events that have happened that day more and more. I prefer to put stories on the front page that are only in the New York Times, enterprise stories, but It's like picking the front page stories. It sounds corny to say this, but it's like being at the most fabulous buffet table in the world. And is it that hard to decide between, the lobster or the steak or the eclairs? I mean, really not that hard.
Is there one story then that you're very proud of during your tenure at the Times?
I'm proud of an awful lot. Our journalists are the best journalists in the world. I'd say since I've been executive editor, I'm proudest of the work that David Barboza has done in China, the story about the wealth and influence accumulated by the ruling families in China, because that was meticulous investigative reporting where he went out and collected all kinds of local records and spent
What about
like
the
more
difficulty
than a
reporting
year.
in China?
It's incredibly difficult. Now the difficulty is publishing in China because our website is blocked in China right now.
Everybody has an opinion of the New York Times, so let's talk about some opinions of the Times. And in particular, the New York Times is often labeled as left-wing, liberal.
Yeah, too liberal.
Too liberal. How do you respond to that?
I respond to it by saying I think the New York Times represents a kind of cosmopolitan outlook towards the world and to this country and this city that may strike, some readers as liberal because we have, paid a lot of attention to stories like gay marriage, but these are newsworthy currents in our society. But it's not liberal in the sense of being doctrinaire or tied to the Democratic Party in any way. I've run many investigative stories and political stories that have made liberal political figures furious.
Right, but they also people also read the editorial page, and you get blamed. Your news department gets blamed for what your editorial department says when they're viewing how whether the Times is a liberal paper or not, right?
No, there's no question that the editorial stance of the New York Times is a liberal point of view.
Coming up on Talk to Al Jazeera, I'll ask Jill Abramson what she thinks is missing from the Times.
I've been asked to keep my voice down because we are so close to the ISIL position.
Who is in charge? Are they going to be held to account?
Right now, we're following the research team into the fire.
They are learning how to practice democracy.
Just seen tear gas being thrown. Glad there's somebody that care about us, man.
Several UN workers were kidnapped.
This is what's left of the hospital.
It's a crime that's underreported.
What do you think killed them?
We're making history right now.
Al Jazeera America.
Welcome back to Talk to Al Jazeera. I'm John Sigenthaler, and I'm talking with the executive editor of the New York Times, Jill Abramson. Women in journalism.
Yeah.
Have you broken the glass ceiling?
I'm always reluctant to say categorically anything like that. I think, it's just a fact that, I'm the first woman to have the job as executive editor, and it's been important to me to promote the careers of other women editors here at the Times who I think are incredibly talented. And, right now, the masthead of the Times, which is, a sort of obscure newspaper term, but it's the list of the top editors that runs every day on the editorial page of the newspaper. It's 10 people, and it's half women right now, which is, a development that, I feel happy about. It's not something I did, when I got this job in 2011, it's not like I said, by 2013, it's going to be half women.
But it was a priority.
But it was a priority to make sure that other women rose up along with me during this period.
One African American in that group of 10.
Yes, which
Dean
is not
Beckett.
enough.
Is that not enough?
Not enough. And I would like to see the progress that we've made on the gender line apply equally to race and ethnicity and sexuality and you name it.
What do you think is missing now from the New York Times?
Cartoons.
Seriously?
I mean, well, we've never had cartoons. We run, the review section
Political cartoons.
runs one, but not, it's not, we don't have like a strip like Doonesbury.
You'd like to see that?
I don't know, maybe so. It depends on like who's and what.
Well, we look forward to many more years of the New York Times, and we appreciate the time you've taken to speak with us. Thank you very much, Jill.
Thank you, John.